Hello, everybody. Good to see you back. I'm Alan Shift Donofrio,
My name is Andy Proper Neckrich.
and this is the Defuse. Let's get this fuse lit and get started. As again, if this is your first time joining us, we'll be running this post show every single day after the events are done, with only one exception. We will be postponing the Sunday one to do it on Monday evenings. But as of course you would imagine, we're going to be talking about day two things going down the line, starting things off with the Los Angeles Gorillas versus the Florida Mutineers. We talked yesterday about this matchup at pretty great length here, Proper, because there were still a lot of question marks. But one thing that we do know for sure, Awakening is 100% the truth, as it was going to be Florida having no real issue with LAG this time around.
I guess it would be just a simplistic wordplay that if you're not awakened to awakening at this point, you better get woke because I mean this player is something special. Just watching them traverse through the entirety of the map and being able to showcase their talents and how well they gel with pretty much everybody that they play with. This is something that you got to see in the earlier stages of challengers, even too. Every single team, every single player that Awakening plays with just plays their role so well.
Yeah, it's one of those things that for LAG, we were not, I would say, underwhelmed by how they played day one. Obviously, they found themselves a W, but it was one of those things that we also didn't take them for much granted because it was just versus Toronto, who again was going through their own couple of roster question marks before the day. But Vivid also again played very, very solid in this one, as he has all weekend so far. And he's kind of a standout player that has really kind of captured both of our attention while we were watching through this. Specifically, the job that he's done on Search and Destroy for LAG has made them not just a solid Search and Destroy team, but potentially one of the best in the league, which feels weird to say.
And it feels very interesting to say too, and a very young individual being able to showcase such a patience and such ability, being able to quite literally shoot at anybody that walks in their tracks, and being able to win those gunfights convincingly too. Multiple times that we've seen on Search and Destroy, like you were mentioning, that Vivid was able to come out on top in clutch fashion too. This player is definitely a force to be reckoned with.
So let's talk Awakening, though, because we'll talk more about Vivid in the future. But of course, with Florida winning this one, they qualify for playoffs out of the winner's side, if you want to call it that, out of the bracket. But Awakening, we know what he's been able to do in the amateur scene. You and I have been following him pretty convincingly, but I don't think either of us would have expected him to have this much of a breakthrough performance on his first weekend, granted with a couple weeks of practice. But my question mark at this point in time is is this Awakening performance from this weekend the best CDL debut we've had so far this year? Because you've got to consider players like Mac has done incredible things for his squad. Shotzi Illy did not have the greatest of starts for Dallas, but also Vivid, Spart at one point in time for LAG, a little bit back and forth. And now, as I guess we could kind of see it post Hayes, Exceed also makes his debut, of course, in more last minute fashion. Is Awakening's performance from this weekend the biggest breakout debut for any amateur we've seen so far this year, in your opinion?
I mean, absolutely, right? I mean, like, you bring up great points, right? You're talking about Mac coming into the mix, too. You can even talk about how Pharaoh came into the mix for Florida Mutineers as well at
Yeah,
a certain
he's
point in
not a
time.
rookie, though, right? Like, it's not his pro league
Sure,
debut.
sure. But I mean, for a Pro League debut, I would definitely sit here and say that absolutely Awakening has had the best standout CDL debut apart from any individual coming into the mix. I mean, coming in to a Florida Mutineers squad, relatively last minute for them, scrimming as much as possible heading into this event and making it the championship Sunday. I mean, that's monumental within its own self. I could sit here and I
Yep.
could read off all of the statistics, all of the KD ratios that they were able to showcase in their matches this entire weekend thus far, but it speaks volumes just to help out Florida Mutineers get back on track to a championship caliber team.
Late candidate for rookie of the year. I know it's way too early to tell, but do you think that we could toss his name in the
Possibly.
ring for? Okay. I like
Consistency
that.
is the only thing that comes around here on
Yes,
forward for Florida
100%.
Mutineers.
100%. But I think, the biggest thing was everyone was writing off this Florida team saying it's the hardest weekend we've had so far in the CDL. They're coming off of a roster swap. Mox obviously brings a lot of notoriety, reputation with his name. It feels like a kind of a risk or maybe a little bit of a gamble, but Awakening has 100% kind of eliminated all of those considerations and only put down the staple of Big Wake is here to play. Let's talk Atlanta Dallas. This was the marquee matchup of the day, as it was, again, top two teams really from the league thus far. And we expected this one to be a barn burner, and we weren't necessarily disappointed as Dallas came out hot with the first two maps, but reverse, all the reverse sweeps coming through once again. Atlanta FaZe will find a way to survive. And as two giants enter, only one could qualify from the winner side bracket. So Atlanta FaZe punches their ticket to the playoff.
Yeah, I don't know if Atlanta at this point are coming to play Call of Duty or if they're just straight up playing Uno because the amount of reverse cards that they're able to showcase throughout the entirety of the season has been fantastic. I mean, again, they got absolutely worked on that opening hard point on Gunrunner 250 to 139. It wasn't even close. Dallas were outslaying them on every single odd angle. The SMG presence just was not there. The Tiny Terriers, maybe their controllers were dead. Maybe they weren't looking at the right monitor. I'm not too sure what was going on ultimately with Atlanta, but what I can tell you is the slaying factor wasn't there all the way until we got to the domination, and then something clicked for them heading into that exact domination, and then later on for the hard point when you have Celium dropping 32 and 27. It was absolutely star-studding to see that Atlanta FaZe can definitely wake up, whether it's too late in the series or if at all that they're still able to win out a series altogether.
Is there ever a consideration of it being too late at this point? I mean, we've only seen
Not for
Atlanta
Atlanta,
go.
apparently.
Yeah, I mean, we've only seen them go game 5 a handful of times. The only time they've lost the game 5 was versus the Minnesota Rocker way back in the LA home series, and that was a barn burner of a matchup.
Yeah.
So I don't know, man. I'll tell you, for this Atlanta FaZe squad, I don't know if I feel more confident about their way to go down 2 maps and then still find the gall to go Dom hardpoint search for 3 in a row, or if I need to see them perform at a better level in the earlier maps, because you go back to what they did in these first 2 maps, they weren't really even a contested here against Dallas in those first 2 maps that they had on the Gunrunner hardpoint of the Ramazza search. And I was thinking, goodness, this could be a 3-0 sweep, no problem for Dallas. I just don't want Atlanta to ever put me in this kind of a bind. I think that everyone out there looks at this team and says, this is the best team in the league. But they have moments like this, and even the same thing yesterday versus Seattle, where you're sitting there saying, are they? Because, yeah, you beat Dallas today, but did you? Because it really does feel like, some of those maps got a little scrappy at the end of it, especially that Petro hard point. I mean, those were trading 60-second hills for the most part, back and forth in the middle part of that map. And one good break could have made that a Dallas win, in my opinion.
Yep, 100% right. I mean, it almost feels like a boxing match at that point where you're just gassing out the enemy opponent. You're just like, we got the better stamina. We make it a map 5. We can make it now for Atlanta FaZe. And for if you're a fan of Atlanta FaZe too, I mean, it's got to be exhausting at this point, right? For all of you to sit there and see how many game 5s and how many reverse sweeps they're able to pull out from their back pockets. It's got to be at certain points exhausting for them. But when it's almost, again, the word consistency comes to mind. Can you always
Sure.
rely on Atlanta to do that? To even win championships. Is it going to end up happening tomorrow? Who
Question
can
marks.
honestly
Yeah.
say? Yeah, exactly.
Hard to say for sure. But again, as you mentioned, Atlanta makes their way through, Florida makes their way through. So we go down to our initial knockout matches: Chicago versus Toronto. The first one that we had a chance to see. And well, I'll tell you here, Chicago 100% has figured out Toronto's game plan. As again, through the Ramazza hard point, it was a little dicey at first, but Chicago put the gas on and then wouldn't be stopped really from that second rotation of hills all the way through the rest of the series. Although, again, it was a little bit back and forth in the Ramazza search and destroy. Chicago was able to take the 6-2 there, and then the 167 to 130 as Envoy and his Uzi vibes came to close things out on that gun runner, which has been kind of fun to see. But again, we had question marks against when Chicago had a chance to play up against Florida, again, dropping it in game number 5 from yesterday. And this was a good way to kind of come out on a Saturday morning and find a way to get yourself going really quickly here with that 3-0, which Toronto, by the way, has never lost a clean sweep in a series. This is the first time they've gone mapless in a series versus any team.
Yeah, I think it speaks volumes just to how much work that you have Toronto Ultra that they really need to be putting to the grindstone because it's not like that when you're looking at Chicago as a whole throughout the entirety of the day. They weren't really consistent. They didn't absolutely, have any eye openers for me personally, apart from maybe a few of those moments on that domination. Uzi
Oh, they
included
smoked
for
him on the
Envoy.
dom, yeah.
Yeah, no, they absolutely annihilated them. That was probably the only point where it'd be like Chicago might be the real deal. But as far as consistency, since Rossini's come into the mix, and ever since they've been kind of dwindling down when top contenders are in the mix, when these brackets are being built out, it's not really enough for me to sit there and be like Chicago's a top contending team, considering the teams that they have beaten in the previous matches.
Well, we'll go. I'm sure we'll talk more about Chicago when we talk about their other knockout matchup. But for Toronto, on the other hand, I have a lot of question marks because again, there was the whole situation with Classic. He went home to New York and wasn't allowed to scrim with the team, and it kind of boasts the question through this where Toronto doesn't have a superstar right now, and that has been kind of the staple since this roster was announced. 10 players on the roster and they still have not found a way to tell me who their best player is convincing that can take over a series, with the only exception being Cammy. And Cammy did not have a good day today. So my whole thing about this is, does Cammy have to be a superstar for Toronto to win? Because when he doesn't perform well, Toronto doesn't win.
Yeah, I mean, for Cammy in a nutshell, yeah, I mean, you're able to see a lot of eye openers if you bring yourself back to that absolute millie whopping that we had yesterday for Toronto Ultra versus LAG. Then yeah, Cammy absolutely went off 32 and 18. But it's hard to not go positive when the 100-point club the enemy team, I suppose. But
Well, yeah, true.
at the same point in time, Cammy at multiple times throughout the entire CDL season for Toronto Ultra has been the brighter spot, sure. But
100%.
there's gotta be a certain point in time when you look at even Chicago, for example. There are certain points in time where you see Scump go off, that you see Formal go off. Arcides is able to piece together a lot of strong moments in a lot of different maps. And you can say the same thing about Atlanta and some other top contending teams, even New York at this point. But when you're looking at a team such as Toronto, that strong, bright star is not really consistent there. And I guess if it has to be anybody, yeah, it's got to be Cammy. Whether they got to step it up or not, it's hard to really put a point on that alone.
It's just so tough to get rid of this Toronto team because they've yet to play Atlanta, but they have not found a way to beat Dallas or Chicago yet. But they
Yeah.
have split series versus both Florida and Minnesota, which I think in a lot of people's minds are kind of the next ones up as far as consistency goes. Obviously, the next time we see teams like London, New York, and Optic, that could swap up of what's going on in the middle. And again, their win-loss ratio versus those teams is relatively even. It just feels like if Toronto's going to want to get past that next hurdle, someone has to become a superstar almost overnight. And Cammy, I think, has showed me the most, which is so weird to say because, yeah, he was a solid player in Black Ops 4, but I don't think anyone has ever listed him as a star in his career yet, not in the professional environment, at least. But it's one of those things that someone's got to get there. Classic obviously did not have a great weekend. I think I don't know how much Kleenex was scrimming with these guys before, but it just is so strange to watch this Toronto team beat a good New York team last weekend, beat a good Minnesota team the last weekend, and take Optic to 5, come up short, not even able to beat LAG, and then getting kind of smoked by Chicago. It's hard to kind of get a read on where the progress meter is for Toronto, or is it just kind of flickering back and forth between like that C plus D minus range, which it seems to kind of fluctuate between at the moment. Let's dig a little bit further forward, though. Seattle going up against Minnesota. This was an interesting one because, again, Seattle had a good series that they were able to put together against Atlanta the day before. We had question marks about Minnesota. And beyond that, we got the late kind of notice that Alex, having some thumb issues in his right hand, would not be playing today, and Exceed would get the last minute start.
Yeah, I mean, when you're thinking about that in a nutshell, think about that, what that means as a full team. We've been talking about that as a whole. Players coming in last minute, how much scrim time do you honestly have? We just
Well,
said it
right.
about Toronto Ultra, and the same thing just comes to mind, especially for Exceed. And when you have to fill the shoes of Alex, who's had very good pivotal moments for Minnesota Rocker at certain points in time, it's really hard to fill those shoes, right? So then you put a lot of weight on the shoulders for GodRx, Assault, and Seam and Silly to be able to absolutely go off. And they have been, I mean, a little bit more to say lackluster ever since their fall from grace, I guess you could say it. Apart from that search and destroy that we saw GodRx go absolutely off, it was really tough to watch because Seattle as a whole, I remember watching the games with you yesterday and today. We were sitting there talking and that they were able to show up. Frodo, Pander, able to at least piece things together coming in for this team. Apathy was in good form too. Octane is doing Sam Octane things, and Will Slack at certain points in time also had some brighter spots, which you don't say too often.
Yeah, and I think the other thing beyond that, when it comes to Minnesota, it's a tough situation to find yourself in. As Exceed, again, he had a great run, I would say, through champs, maybe blessed a little bit by the bracket from Black Ops 4 playing with Sicario. But you take a look at what this Minnesota team looked like today, and they were slow. They were kind of out of sorts a little bit, especially in the domination when a couple of clutch decisions need to be made. They kind of stood their ground in that gun runner, not really deciding which direction they wanted to go. A couple different moments where they're sending 3 people one way to the other. And it was just a little bit sloppy in the first 7 minutes of that one. And by that point, it was just a little bit too late to come back. But that's kind of been a trend, though. Again, you take a look at Minnesota Rocker outside of their hard point. In the last 2 weeks, they've only won 2 of their search and destroys, and they've only won a single domination, which kind of lends me to believe that can we truly just credit the fact that it was just Exceed coming in last minute of why Minnesota fell here? Or even with Alex, I see a world where Minnesota would not just instantly beat Seattle, who's looking like a more complete squad. My worries are extended beyond just the immediate substitution from today.
Yeah, I mean, for Minnesota as a whole, right? It's talked about all the way up at the highest levels. They found a lot of good value in a couple of good opening weeks. In the fifth time that they were able to pull a solid 30 points, they're currently sitting at fourth overall in the standings. But it's all talked about on broadcast, in comments, everywhere across the globe for Minnesota Rocker. That other teams, it's not just that Minnesota are getting worse, but other teams are getting better. And that's what you ultimately have to be concerned with if you are a Minnesota fan, is that maybe your team is staying pretty stagnant where the rest of the teams are on a steady incline. And that's what
Sure.
can be scary come champs, because we talked about it last night on the Defuse. That it's not just Minnesota dropping all the way down in the rankings, but they're sitting at fourth. Where Florida Mutineers, especially off
They
this
won't be
weekend
anymore.
included, exactly, they're not going to be there anymore. Florida Mutineers are definitely going to be taking that spot soon.
I mean, here's the bottom line. Last 3 weekends, they've played a total of 8 games. They've only won 2 of them. So there's
Not
a
good.
little bit of a trend for you guys trending down. Obviously, there is Minnesota. But as we move forward, now we talk about our last chance matches as the Los Angeles Guerrillas would go up against the Chicago Huntsmen, a matchup that I think everyone was looking at saying there's no chance that Chicago drops this one. Surely not. But the big problem here for Chicago is they have yet to do well in search and destroy through the weekend. The only win they had was versus Toronto earlier in the day. This time through, they only win a total of 5 rounds as they get 1/6 on the Arklov Peak, and then they lose the map 5-4-6 to Los Angeles Guerrillas, who sneak away a win on the Gunrunner Hardpoint from Chicago and nearly sneak away a Hackney Yard win on top of that for the map 4. This was a matchup that Los Angeles Guerrillas have really now shown us that they are here to play and that these roster moves are actually netting some positives. It isn't just a little bit of luck here or there. The addition of Saints has made this team a more complete squad. The only thing we need to see still is these guys to win a freaking domination, man. They still can't get through that. But the good news is in the last 2 weekends, they've played about 10 search and destroys. They've only lost a single map so far.
Yeah, I mean, for Saints, you hit it right on the head there. But Saints actually started off really slow in that opening match versus
He
Florida
did.
Mutineers, but something absolutely clicked for them heading in towards this match against Chicago. And again, when you're thinking about this as a whole, there's no reason why they should have gone to a map 5. That Hackney Yard hardpoint, it was hotly contested all the way down into the final fight on P1 through a third rotation of hills. It was close. It was very, very close. And for LAG to be able to sneak that on right past Chicago Huntsmen, I think that speaks volumes in a way that they were able to not only keep their heads in the game, but maybe even try to say against some naysayers that were in a place where they've been a 100-point club twice, that they're
No.
able to at least bring things back together, or at least to a static fashion. Now, you can also piece together a lot of different other narratives there. Maybe Chicago Huntsmen kind of they fell off towards the end there. Formal was trying to play literally every single role. They were trying to get hill time. They were trying to break in sort of a lot of different rotations, get initial time, this, that, and the other. But as far as the team coordination is concerned, apart from Aqua only dropping 17 kills, LAG are really they started heating up as far as respawn is concerned towards the tail end of this series. And once you get to search, you said it wonderfully. Chicago, they have not looked good here on that game mode all
No.
weekend.
And the other interesting thing, just to kind of linger on Los Angeles Guerrillas just a little bit more, you talk about just the 1-for-1 substitution. Again, it was Spart for Saints, now Saints back for Spart. And it's one of those things that just watching the two players kind of move, like the little subtle contrasts in comparison between the two of them. Saints is a little bit more in line with what he thinks his team is doing behind him, where it really does feel like at times Spart was just kind of running forward and trying to get kills. And let's be honest, if you want to take it one step forward for all of you absolute fanatics out there when it comes to amateur COD right now, that was what the Atlanta FaZe Academy team did to beat UYU at the Challengers homestand in Atlanta. Spartan Sib just ran. They just went and they were finding kills. And that worked for both of them because nobody else was meeting them on that style of aggression. But
Sure.
what we've seen from players like Sibilance in the Challenger scene is now he's actually pulled back on the reins quite considerably to the point where he's actually pulling out a third AR if needed, either for Azir Cave or for any search and destroy maps that they feel like they need the extra gun. Spart was not doing that. He continued to play at that same style and the same pace, at least that from what I could read, than what he was when he was playing as an amateur to what he was doing in the pro league. And Saints has kind of tuned his gunplay and his gameplay around to a point where he is really enabling his squad to make plays happen. And you're seeing that really elevated into the search and destroy, especially on that Arklov peak. My goodness, I haven't seen an offense look that good on Arklov peak in some time.
Yeah, it's pretty definitive, and that wasn't a 6-1 scoreline. That was a utter butt bruising that you ended up seeing for LAG. Handed Chicago Huntsman. It was not even
Yeah.
close. I mean, you said it so wonderfully, right? The enabler in that factor. You get a lot of that coming around the works across a lot of different CDL teams. Matt comes to mind for New York Subliners just as a firm example of this too. But I mean, for Saints too, who's been able to adapt their own personal play and bring themselves back to just trying to run at the enemy team and trying to find all the kills and then just going towards that enabler role, who can also play OBJ if need be, but also
Yeah.
just is able to showcase their understanding of what it actually means to be on a team of this caliber with LAG. uh, you're only going to find success soon after.
Okay, concerns for Chicago. Obviously, we can't go without talking about the search and destroy. It was not good this week. But I don't think the conversation ends with just this mode is bad. That's why you're losing. We've seen a number of wonky things kind of come up again, even in all of their hard points in the last 2 weeks. Their most convincing win since the Seattle homestand through this end of week here for them in Minnesota was a 250 to 160 versus the London Royal Ravens. Everything else was a 190 point allotment or more. Actually, everything was actually above 200 points, with the exception of that 250 to 160. And then today, the 250 to 190 on the gun runner. That is also a little bit telling for a team that is slaying as heavy as the Chicago Huntsman team can at times. They're not convincingly taking hardpoint wins. The only real mode that they've really had big blowouts in the last couple of weeks has been the domination, where they've also faced a couple of bigger blowouts. You think back to the Paris Legion during that Seattle homestand. Once again, they lost that by nearly 40 plus points on one of their best maps. There's something else fundamentally that's going on with the play style of this team right now. And I know we talked about it a lot when it comes to Pristini. Sometimes you just look at the minimap and he is on an island, and not just on an island trying to make a solo play. Even if he wins the 1v1, he finds himself surrounded by three other members with depending on who they're playing. And there's no chance for him to find an exit or a teammate to find a trade. And that's kind of the one thing that I'm looking at for Chicago when it comes to finding the polarity between Pristini, Scump, and Envoy. How are you going to get those three SMGs in line? Because what we're seeing from both Atlanta and Dallas right now, and even for Florida, when all three of your SMGs are playing in tandem with one another, it's very difficult to beat those squads. And that's just not been the case for Chicago.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like this entire meta of Call of Duty Modern Warfare is kind of on the bench for SMG presence. And when your
Sure, yeah.
SMGs aren't showing up and they're not finding the kills, it's kind of really tough to see what you're able to do. I mean, again, the Atlanta versus Dallas match comes to mind exclusively, where it was literally a shits of tides. Now Atlanta's finding value where Dallas wasn't. But going back to the overall factor here of Chicago Huntsmen, when you're thinking about this team as a whole, and you're thinking about the scorelines that they were able to showcase for themselves earlier on in the CDL season, and then where we are right now, you're talking role swaps. You're talking
Yeah.
individuals not getting along in team comms, moving away from gunless, bringing in Pristini. There's a lot of different factors that go into the mix as far as what's not clicking for this team. And even when we saw Formal on that SMG too, looked great. On the AR, looks fantastic. RC's on the flex can definitely come through and bring in the works, but I think you hit it wonderfully there, friend. Is that when Pristini on that SMG roll and they're trying to literally force their way into situations that are not favorable for them, they look like they can take a lot of gunfights in a 1v1 stature. But when they're forcing their way through certain engagements, that Ramaza hardpoint comes to mind when it was actually the Twins on P2, ready to set up for the initial time. It was them versus about three other members coming into
Yeah.
the works. And Pristini just goes right towards the construction staircase, right into two waiting enemy lines, and they get absolutely obliterated and left RCDs with an M4 on that point. And what happened soon after? They lost that hill.
On a scale of 1 to 10 on the Richter scale, how shook are you after watching the Chicago Huntsmen kind of fold this weekend a little bit?
I'm pretty damn shook. I'm pretty damn shook because again, it comes back it comes back to the same thing that I was talking about with Minnesota. Like, it's not necessarily that it's just one team getting worse, but you also have teams getting better along the way too. Things are still further developing for all these teams along the way. LAG are able to make works with their rosters,
Mm,
and they're able to find a lot of value in that soon after. It's not just one team always getting worse, but it's other teams learning along the way and adapting, and getting better as the season further develops.
fair enough. Well, before we talk about the Seattle and Dallas match next on our to-do list here, again at the end of the show, we'll be taking some viewer questions, which you can submit now on Twitter for a chance if we select your question to get free CMG credits. That sounds like a pretty good deal to me. Proper, you like that deal?
That seems like a pretty easy
I
peasy lemon
love
squeezy
that
deal.
deal. Hell yeah, we do love lemons to squeeze as well. So go ahead and just type
I love
exclamation
lemonade.
point questions in the chat. You like your lemonade real sweet, I bet, don't you?
No, no, actually, no.
Really?
Because I mean, when you're thinking about lemonade, right? It's almost like orange juice at the point. Would you rather taste the sugar or would you rather taste the
The
orange
juice
juice?
for sure, dude. If I'm going to squeeze the juice, I'm going to make sure I taste the work that I've put into it. But make sure you type exclamation point questions. Go to that Twitter link. Put down your questions with the hashtag the Defuse at the end of it. And if you're lucky enough to be chosen to get your question answered, you'll get yourself some free credits. We love that, man. Free credits? I mean, come on. The CMG admins are twisted for giving that one up. But let's talk about things that are even more twisted. Seattle versus Dallas. I guess this one wasn't that twisted at all, as we kind
No.
of expected Dallas to have no real problem with this one. And to be fair, they didn't really have any problem with this one really at all. Again, the gunrunner for the first hard point, everybody on the Empire nearly drops 30 kills for an easy W, 250, 160. They do take the search as you would expect, but Seattle showing signs of life throughout. And then, well, Clay took us to his lovely little room of love as he was able to spray paint for the last 2 minutes or so of the domination, which
Ah, the love shack.
it's a beautiful thing, really. And I feel like it was only a matter of time before we saw something like this. And I'm glad that Clayster was the one to try to innovate it.
Yeah, I mean, like some call it art, others call it vandalism, but when it comes down to Clayster, it's a love shack, baby. Like that's plain and simple. But I mean, yeah, this series, I was literally folding laundry during this entire series. This was probably the one series that I was not
Very
actually
responsible of
sitting
you,
here
first
and
of all.
just sitting here and just hardcore analyzing. I was obviously watching it. It was on my main monitor, which is a giant TV above my two monitors. Keep in mind, you. So I was still sitting here analyzing it, but I was multitasking. Okay, don't try to downplay my ability to sit here and analyze a Call of Duty match while I'm folding my boxers. Thank you. But at the same point in time, when you're thinking about this as a whole, where I really got tuned in were some of those middle in that meat and potatoes of that search destroy on Gunrunner. I was very impressed with what we were able to see from Seattle. It got really close. Seattle were able to showcase their adaptations. Patience being played by App in that boiler room was fantastic. And again, we also said there at the same time, Enabled was able to show up, and we at the same time, we're like, how many times you got to say that for Enabled throughout the entirety of the season? Not often. But for this team of Seattle to even find value in a gun runner search and destroy where they were 3-5 and Dallas were 6-1, now 7-1. It's still value to behold, but again, when you're thinking about Dallas having the coaching staff that they do for search and destroy specifically, yeah, it's really hard to out adapt this Dallas Empire squad, especially when the SMGs get heated up like Shotzi,
Oh, I mean, the SMG line has been absolutely terrifying for the side of the Dallas Empire.
to say
But
the least.
before we talk more Empire, I want to talk Surge because Proto finishes this weekend, and I'll be completely candid. I hesitate to kind of jump onto this rope because we've seen adaptations from the Seattle Surge saying, "Hey, they're starting to get a little better at search and destroy. Watch out. These guys could maybe surprise some people." But then all of a sudden things turn around and it kind of feels like that progress is not just limited to a certain extent, but they kind of fall another 10 steps backwards. I will say this much though, as weird as it is to see Karma not playing Call of Duty and with these other very veteran players, the dynamic that Proto and Panda are bringing to the mix right now has lifted my spirits a little bit more, and especially considering the fact that we know that these guys are playing with nothing to lose at this point, not just this weekend, but really for the rest of the year. I mean, at this point, I think enough people have kind of written them off to sit there and say that there are no expectations for us. So let's go out there and try some wild things and try to catch some people off guard. And that has come through a couple different times. Again, they go essentially 1-for-1 in each of the hard points, each of the search and destroys. And unfortunately, they don't get a fourth time to play through domination, but they went 1 and 2 there. It's one of those things that you start to feel a little bit inspired by the mode wins. The only problem is when they lose pretty badly at 160, 250, and then they had two Hackney Yard Doms where they lost by nearly 70 plus. So it just feels weird to try to, guess and predict what these guys are going to be able to do in the future. But I'm kind of hopeful that Proto and Pander will kind of use their duo as a way to kind of help push this team a little bit further forward because it's one of those things that we've seen now. Octane, one of the best players in the league, but when he doesn't perform, this team gets smoked. Kind of the same thing with Apathy when the SMG line was considered. If he has big games, Seattle has big games. When he doesn't have big games, Seattle gets smoked. So I need to find that consistency, and I'm hoping that Proto can bring it to the mix with Pander kind of right beside him.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, again, I mean, you said it. Mr. Datastic and Sam Octane are there to showcase their abilities and their talents. This team absolutely goes off. But I mean, for this as a whole, for Seattle, I believe this was a point that you actually hit yesterday, and it's something that really struck home for me is that if you're a team and you're playing with nothing to lose, yeah, you got to try new things. You might as well try to get a little antsy on your search and destroys. You might as well try to point for your aggression because you might end up finding the value and catching a lot of teams off
Yeah.
guard. And we were able to see that yesterday with Seattle versus Atlanta phase, winning those first two maps, going 6-5 in the Gunrunner Search and Destroy. Yes, but still a Search and Destroy win for them, nevertheless, which was a bright spot to see, especially with Proto coming into the mix, like we were talking about in yesterday's show too, and today. Having experience with Pander is really good for this team as a whole because when you're thinking about the word enable, we talked about that in full with Saints and the LAG, but it can also be said the same thing for Proto and Pander, just enabling for Octane and Apathy to be back in their championship.
Well, okay, now that we've gotten through our results, let's look forward to tomorrow. Again, all of our playoff matches will be coming through, both semis, of course, straight into the finals. The Atlanta FaZe will be playing up against the Los Angeles Guerrillas. I believe that's scheduled to come out first. I'm actually not 100% sure on that. And the Florida Mutineers will play up against the Dallas Empire. Starting things off, Atlanta versus the Los Angeles Guerrillas. I don't think that either of us, even in consideration of the fact that LAG were able to beat Chicago, are looking at this squad as having the potential of really putting up much of a fight versus Atlanta. But I will say this much. Outside of the domination so far this weekend and the weekend previous, really, if you think about it, back to the Florida home series last they played, they are 1 for 1 in each of their hard points and each of their search and destroys. And when you take a look at this LAG squad that has been incredible, only again dropping one search and destroy in the last 2 weekends, is there potential for LAG not just to extend this series, but potentially surprise Atlanta here?
I think the Sense in 100%. I mean,
Okay.
maybe the LAG, maybe they win the search, first search, but I think this all comes down because I mean, we saw Saints relatively slow at the beginning of the day, heated up at the end of the day, and if you're not able to come out of the gates at the beginning of the entire day tomorrow on CDL Sunday and showcase your abilities early on against Atlanta FaZe, they're going to eat you whole and they're going to spit you right back out because that is a championship caliber team and time out, every single time that they show up on Sunday, it is a very hard chance that you end up taking that team down unless you're Dallas Empire, for example. But it's still, or Minnesota Rocker, depending on what weekend you're specifically looking at. But still, nevertheless, for Atlanta FaZe in the respawn versus LAG, I mean, you said it. For LAG as a whole, didn't exactly look good on that game mode in quite some time. I don't necessarily think that going up against Atlanta FaZe is going to be the time when they wake up and they start winning out those map modes.
Yeah, that's tough. The domination is definitely going to be, I think, the most punishing map, mode, combo, whatever we play on. Doesn't matter where we play on. I just don't have high hopes for LAG and the domination, but I do feel pretty hopeful about them in the search and destroy. And I think that could possibly, again, you could maybe see another world where Atlanta FaZe, depending on whose map picks come up first, if LAG could take the first hard point, they could very well be up 2-0 in this series.
Yeah,
Again, forcing Atlanta to have to reverse sweep. And
it's possible.
you wonder how big the ice chest is at that point in time if they have to go for 3 reverse sweeps in a row for Atlanta. On the other side, the Florida Mutineers will be going up against the Dallas Empire. I guess I should say also before we swap over, this will be the first time that Atlanta and Los Angeles play up against each other. So it'd be interesting to see how they kind of match up. On the opposite side, though, the Dallas Empire going up against the Florida Mutineers. Last time these two squads play was way back on land during the Los Angeles home series where Florida suffered a 3-0 defeat. But that said, all the maps relatively close. 252, 13 hard point, 6-4 search, and then a 159, 152 domination. So throw a little bit of an asterisk, I would say, next to that 3-0 that Dallas was able to find. And my question here is, can Awakening, new to this roster, provide enough of, I hesitate to call it a honeymoon period, but do you think they could bring enough of the freshness to overcome a Dallas Empire squad that was more than comfortable throughout the day today?
I honestly think so. Honestly, I think Awakening finds the value that you're looking for because I mean, if Awakening starts opening up the field for this entire team, then you end up seeing the Skies showing up and what they're able to showcase for themselves in a championship caliber form. Pharaoh has been able to showcase their abilities at the same time as Frosty and Havoc. I mean, Havoc being able to bring out the hurt as far as a lot of different properties on a lot of different game modes, hardpoint, search and destroy, and domination is a force to be reckoned with. And again, if you're able to somehow outpace the SMG presence of Shotzi, Illy, and Huke, then absolutely, I think that Awakening can be the benefactor here. And Dallas Empire might not be ready for the pace that Awakening is going to set.
And the other side of things, I think this is actually a very heads up matchup because we saw Skies how he plays on domination versus how Clayster plays on domination. Both are there just to anchor the favorite side of the map. So it
Right.
really will, I think, come down to what happens up front. And for Dallas, I think right now they're boasting the best SMG line in the CDL. But it's going to be interesting to see how a player like Awakening matches up against these guys because, yeah, it was an impressive performance to take down Chicago when we had a lot of established rep being kind of thrown into Chicago's corner because of who they are and what they've done. Uh, you also beat an LAG squad where, again, you mentioned the fact that Saints did not necessarily have the greatest start to today, but Vivid and them obviously picked up the slack near the end and they had a really good series still to kind of keep that into four. It's one of those things that this is, I think, the proving point for the Florida Mutineers. And I think it would say a ton if not only could they extend this series to five, but if they were to somehow find a way to beat the Dallas Empire, who, like you kind of heard at the end of the broadcast, even the CDL cast said the Dallas Empire are the best team in the game. Even after they faced a defeat to the Atlanta FaZe, I would say tons, I think, for Florida to come out and beat this Dallas Empire squad, who I think deserves to be listed as a top two team without a doubt here in the league so far. So I'm actually really interested to see how this one unfolds. But to finalize this one all out, full on playoff predictions, four teams enter. Who you got coming out in the end of it?
At the end of it,
At the
I
end of it,
saw
who's your champ?
I said this yesterday that
You did.
whoever wins versus Atlanta versus Dallas is going to be the champion of this home series. So you already know where my mind is going. I'm straight going on the Atlanta FaZe hype train that they are definitely going to end up winning this entire thing just off of that pure point alone. Mark my words.
You look like an absolute buffoon right now. That hat
It
has
doesn't take much.
no business being.
It doesn't take much. It's over my headset. It doesn't take
I
much.
trust me. Everybody who's watching this right now knows that that hat is over your headset right now, unless you just grew 4 inches straight vertically on your forehead, which would
My
be
brain's got to
interesting.
fit somewhere.
You kind of look like this is going to be lost on so many people out there. You look like a cone head, like you look like Dan Aykroyd, like Conehead style with how tall that is. If you don't know who the Coneheads are, I know our producer Jay Pistachio's got no idea.
Yeah, no idea.
Definitely do yourself a service to go look up at least a clip from the Coneheads. Classic, instant classic. Speaking of instant classic, though, I think we've got an instant classic on our hands between Florida and Dallas, and I think Atlanta takes LAG. I'm actually going to go the other way, though. I've got Atlanta getting through, but losing to whoever wins between Florida and Dallas. I think that's the championship matchup right there. I think Florida and Dallas is the top tier matchup for tomorrow. I might be blasted for that, but
You might
uh,
be.
I don't know, man. I just what I've seen from Florida so far, the way that Pharaoh is able to read Awakening and how Awakening is able to take away advantages from their opponents so far that we've seen today is very, very impressive. And I think if he can continue to play at an individual level like he has the last couple of days, I think that this team could absolutely do some great work tomorrow to possibly take a championship. How cool would that be though? Pharaoh joins. It takes a little bit, but then they win a championship, and then Awakening joins, and if he wins a championship,
Monumental. Then you can definitely put
nuts.
it in the mix, in the running for Rookie of the Year after their first weekend coming in the mix. Then it's going to open up a lot of eyes. If this weekend wasn't enough already for you to be like, this Awakening kid is absolutely cracked, then that would absolutely put a definitive point into you thinking just that.
Let's take a look at viewer predictions or viewer questions, rather, I should say. Again, if you have not submitted a question yet, you can do so quickly if you type exclamation point questions in the chat for a chance at getting a credit giveaway from the CMG admins. They're just giving away free credits if we answer your question um, uh, on the Twitter that we kind of have going for here, guys. So as we're taking a look at this, let's take a look to see who's said what. And actually, I'm going to answer this question not because it's a good question, but because I actually missed part of our rundown. The question was from AKA underscore FUD. Is the Vector changing the meta? We did not get a chance to talk Uzi or Growl because I'm a forehead and forgot to mention it in the run of
It's
show.
true. You are
But with the
forehead.
Vector in the mix, is there potential, do you think, to see a swap up from just seeing MP5s and M4s through the back quarter of the season?
Oh, there was also a lot of talk about just the vector being GA'd as a whole
Yeah,
for the
period.
CDL.
Right, right.
Yeah, yeah, just because of about how some pro players honestly feel about how fast that gun kills, and that really says a lot when you have 10mm rounds in an MP5 in the mix too. But I mean, for the Uzi, just to go and put a whole circle onto this conversation, we've only seen one player that's Envoy find value in it and really just pull it out in a nutshell. And well, they've dropped 30 bombs on Gunrunner. So I mean, if you can find value in that in a very close range proximity, then absolutely. The Growl, not so much. Again, Silly was the only person that we've seen bring it out, and that was 100% just for magazine size. That you put yourself in top
Yeah, for the
useless on a
spam, right?
ZK that you just spam straight down
Yeah.
lane and just hope something connects. I don't really see anything changing up anytime soon. Unless the vector doesn't get GA'd, then possibly, but I haven't seen it put into full practice yet because the 10mm rounds in the MP5 is just reliable.
Yeah, it's consistent, it's reliable, and there was a point in time, and I forget who did it. I want to say it happened at the CWL level, but I know for a fact it happened at the amateur level, where a couple of players on like the frequency hardpoint breakoff were pulling out a Spitfire because it shoots faster, kills
Yep.
faster, and that might be a purpose served by the Vector because the rate of fire is obviously faster. Its damage is also pretty incredible. But the things that we've seen Envoy do with the Uzi it obviously has some inherent cons. It doesn't do as well up close and personal as the MP5 does, but we've seen him three bullet people at medium to long range if you can hold down the
Stockless, no
recoil.
foregrip.
It's nuts, dude. Stockless, no foregrip at all. It's absolutely insane. I would love to see it kind of change up the meta a little bit, but I think as far as the actual definition, will either the Vector, the Uzi, the Growl, will those change the meta? No, I don't think so.
No.
I think that the most efficient tactic available is to run your ARs as M4s and your SMGs as MP5s. But a good question. Thank you, Fud, for submitting that one over. Another one. This is actually from Viox. Best sleeper team that could make a run with or without changes. And I imagine he means not just that are served this weekend, but also the ones that are on the off weekend here this current weekend.
Is that have already made changes or that haven't made changes?
The
Sleeper
best
team.
sleeper team that could make a run. And I think
That,
he's insinuating that they could do it with or without changes. So, like,
that's
which
it.
teams in like the bottom six do you think could potentially break top four?
In the bottom four that could break in.
We'll say bottom six right now.
It's definitely not Paris. I'll tell you that much. I mean, honestly speaking, I just because of New York's placing, I would say that New York's been powering up quite heavily.
Mm.
You say bottom six, I guess technically optics in there too.
Yeah,
But
barely.
without,
Yeah, 70
yeah,
points. Yeah, they're in there technically
I'm
standings wise.
leaning more towards I'm leaning more towards New York subliners that when we see them in the next home series, they're gonna power up all the way to Super Saiyan God and they're just gonna go and blow everybody out of the park. Mac Melts has been absolutely fire for this team and just has been a an absolute chef's kiss to watch what they've been able to do for this New York squad.
I'm gonna go with maybe not a quote unquote sleeper, but nobody's talking about these guys right now. The London Royal Ravens have put together something
Said
that
bottom
is
six.
I know, and that's why I say it's not technically a sleeper because they're sitting with 80 points at 8 and 9
He
overall.
is cheating.
But nobody's talking about the London Royal Ravens. They're
Cheating.
playing with two guys that they didn't necessarily expect to be playing with. Nasty was supposed to be the guy. He couldn't get here off of visas, and Shawnee has stepped the heck up. I don't know, man. I think from what we've seen out of the London Royal Ravens, no one's talking about them. And I even have a weird like devil on my shoulder saying, "What are you talking about right now, Shift?" With
Because you're
their
cheating.
performance through Search and Destroy in the last week, I think that they could put together not a championship run necessarily, but I think they could put a top four run together. And the way I look at Sleeper is nobody's talking about London as a top 4 team. And I think that they could potentially do that. That's where I'm talking. I don't care if I'm cheating. I don't care.
It was
Get outta
talking about
here.
today at the tail end of the broadcast too. I mean, Zero did do great things for this team. Actually
Oh,
coming in
it's
and
super surprisingly
yeah.
too.
Yeah, and Shawnee has also stepped up. You're definitely not wrong, but you're still cheating. So
All right, fine. I don't
cool.
know. It's whatever. Last one. We'll just give this one. This is a giveaway one to kind of finish off the stream. Pasteurize with a Z. Ask who is the best player on Dallas Empire right now, and why is it Shotzi? I threw that in at the tail end. That's not actually what he asked, but
But we're agreeing. I don't know what that. What do you want me to say? I mean, like we talked about it yesterday, making a run for Rookie of the Year. Shotzi has been absolutely powering up since the launch weekend. You're able to see what this kid's able to do, even with Merc and Maven on the broadcast. They even said just throw everything else out the window. Just watch Shotzi. Kid is absolutely he's cracked.
He's
an
nasty,
absolute
dude.
He's an absolute nut. Like. And you're only going to get better from here, and it's only going to make the rest of the SMG line show up. Illy and Hook are definitely able to benefit from such a SMG being in the presence. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about the best player on Dallas Empire, and you say that it's not Shotzi? I'm not going out to have a drink with you.
Best player in the league, Shotzi, right now?
Best player in the league?
Question mark?
All right.
I'll make it easier for you. Here, I'll make the softball a touch bigger. If Dallas win this weekend and Shotzi continues to play well, is he the best player in the league?
But Celium's looks so good. Celium's looks so good though. Why could it?
But if
maybe.
Okay.
Maybe I'll give you a firm yellow on that signal. I can't give you a green or a red
because big time yield onto that.
Easy.
Advance at your own caution. I'll say this much: it would be an incredible statement for let's just figure that if Shotzi is the best player in the league right now, that means he's also Rookie of the Year. That would be 2 years in a row that a Rookie of the Year is also potentially MVP of the season. That would be nuts. It would be absolutely nuts.
Plain and simple. It'd be nuts.
It'd be nuts. Well, we'll say bye-bye for now. This was a lot of fun. Hope you guys enjoyed the show. Again, as a brief reminder, though, for you, we will not be back tomorrow evening as a couple of us have some other commitments to take care of. But what we do have is another show on Monday. We'll be back Monday evening for this one, sometime probably around 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern time, right in the middle of the evening. So hopefully all of you guys out in the West Coast can catch it, as well as you cool cats out across the pond in the EU. So hopefully we'll catch you guys back for that one. Proper final thoughts. You want to stand on your Atlanta Face podium one more time before we sign off here?
I think that me just sitting here holding this hat and not budging a single ounce off of my one individual John Madden's stat line yesterday of saying whoever beat Atlanta FaZe versus Dallas Empire is going to win the whole damn thing. Mark my words, chat. Mark my words. Right. It's coming true. I'm not an oracle. I'm just a man of facts.
Yeah, someone find Mark and make sure that he notes down those words. We'll say goodbye, though. We'll catch you guys on Monday, friends and family. Make sure that fuse doesn't fizzle out. We'll catch you next time. So long.